It's Saturday, and welcome to another episode of PO Cubed, your chronological guide to Nintendo's handheld consoles. My name's DD Ash, and this week we're playing Dragon's Lair, The Adventure, The Chessmaster, Ray Thunder, Burger Time Deluxe, and Fortified Zone. Let's start the show.
Dragon's Lair, the fantasy adventure where you become a valiant knight on a quest to rescue the fair princess from the clutches of an evil dragon. You control the actions of a daring adventurer finding his way through the castle of a dark wizard who has infested it with treacherous monsters and obstacles. In the mysterious caverns below the castle, your odyssey continues against the awesome forces that oppose your efforts to reach the Dragon's Lair. Lead on, adventurer. Your quest awaits.
Dragon's Lair, The Legend, DMG-DL. Developed by Motive Time and published by Ubisoft in North America, Epic Sony Records in Japan, and Elite Systems in Europe. No. Oh, gods no, they didn't. Did they? Well, yes and no. This is a collect-em-up platform adventure starring Dirk the Daring, rather than any excruciating port of a game that barely worked on the NES. The idea is that Princess Daphne, at death's door and with her dying breath, smashed her life crystal into hundreds of pieces. You, as the courageous but ultimately useless Dirk, have to collect all 194 shards of the crystal in order to awaken this knight, that the two of you may venture forth to vanquish the evil Mordroc. The game actually ends when you wake the knight, which leads me to ponder if a sequel was ever in the works. You'll not know how many shards you've found until you die, which is a strange oversight. Aside from the characters, this game doesn't have a whole lot to do with the original. In fact, this game is a reskinned version of an old ZX Spectrum game called Rollercoaster. It's still got deaths aplenty, but you're not really fighting anything. It's more a case of figuring out how to get through without the scenery killing you. So yeah, it's got that in common with the NES title at least, and here it makes more sense. Rather than touching a freaking door, it's spikes and pitfalls that kill you. None of the enemies hurt you, but are quite often usable as platforms. It's a semi-non-linear experience in that it's often up to you to choose directions or find other paths that aren't immediately obvious. It's a little cryptic at times, and there's not a lot of rhyme or reason to the layouts. Lots of moving platforms, and invisible ones too. Quite often you can step on a platform halfway up a pillar or tree where there appears to be nothing. With good old minecart sections. These suck ass in the time-honoured minecart section tradition. When you think of Dragon's Lair, you're reminded of painfully slow movement and unfairly unresponsive controls. That's certainly not the case here. The pace is nice and quick, and jumps are not that unfair. You get some shonkiness at times, but it's not unlearnable. Patience and consideration is your friend. Don't mistake me though, the game is hard as nails. The jumps cannot be controlled that much. Dirk travels the same distance with every jump, which is why planning helps. The artwork in these games has always been quite nice. The original arcade version, while basically a navigable cartoon, looked way better than anything else that it had been lined up next to. Even the NES version looked alright, at a massive gameplay cost. Dragon's Lair The Legend has some outstanding backgrounds with lovely animated details. Not a single pixel remains unused. Sure, this may occasionally make things hard to see, but the whole thing is very artful. The little signs you find along the way are charming too, saying things like, "Pass beyond this point and ye shall surely die," and "Lake of the Dead, no swimming." So, it's not at all like the NES game. It's absolutely gorgeous to look at, sounds pretty decent, and shockingly, it's playable. You'll die so much, and the controls may put some folks off, but I find something captivating about the whole experience. The European version is a little more lenient, with less fall damage and spikes not being insta-deaths, so maybe get that. On a side note, have a quick look at the Game Boy Color version of Dragon's Lair to see something that was as impressive on a handheld in 2001 as the original Laserdisc version must have been in 1983. It's a basically frame-perfect representation.
Chessmaster es un monstruo del ajedrez, un reto inigualable para los superconsoleros de mejor cerebro. Chessmaster es el superajedrez de Super Nintendo.
The Chessmaster DMG-EM, developed by Park Place Productions and published by High Tech Expressions in North America, Nintendo in Europe, and Ultron in Japan. Released on everything at the time, the Chessmaster is a pretty good way to play the game we mostly all know. It serves as a good introduction as well, as basic rules and more advanced tactics are handily given in both the manual and game. There are a lot of configurations to set, including, most importantly, the difficulty. The biggest relief for me with any board game is having decent AI, which apparently is harder to program than you'd imagine. Here, it's spot on. Players from beginner to expert can find a level that's challenging, leaving you feeling like you've learned something. Some of the other settings you can choose from include turn time, which colour you play as, the level of anticipation the AI has, and so on. It's quite in-depth. I'm not going to try to teach you how to play chess, but I don't really need to. Like I say, the game does walk you through it if you so require. Teaching mode doesn't necessarily give you obvious hints, but rather shows you the legal moves for each piece when you click on them. There's no save battery, but any game can be recalled at any time via a password. It's quite a long one, but then there are 32 pieces arranged over 64 squares. The possible different computations is maths I can't even do. In a chess game, you might think that the sound isn't important at all, and I'd hasten to agree. I want to touch upon it briefly with the Chessmaster though. One of the few examples of digitized voice on the Game Boy is scattered throughout. It's hit and miss. Welcome to Chessmaster is nice and clear, but the checkmate and stalemate, not so much. It's not too bad with headphones, I guess, but I always play this with the volume down. Also, there's a bloody annoying sample that plays after every move. Chiptunes would have been much better instead of insisting on overusing the digital recordings. It's far too low def to sound anything other than irritating. Honestly, you don't need a chirp to tell you that a move has been completed. It's weird having anything at all. Other than that, there's no music in-game, which is correct. What else is there to say? It's chess, and it's good. The screen is used really well, and a nice attempt to render the pieces was made. Movement is easy to pull off. I hate when you've not only got to think about your next move, but also how the controls work. Here, it's no hindrance. You get what it says you get. Not a bad one to have in your collection. Ray Thunder DMG-RTJ, developed by Nihon Busan and published by Nichibutsu. With so much spotlight on retro gaming these days, little is unknown. As more and more people become interested in the hobby, the encyclopedic wealth of knowledge about even the most obscure games of yesteryear grows even larger. This makes finding a game that appears apparently unknown to even the dustiest corners of the internet repositories even more intriguing. That's what we have here. Ray Thunder is a game I'd never come across or even heard of until browsing through listings on a reputable online marketplace. My attention was grabbed by a gorgeous looking multicolored Game Boy box with a picture of a fighter pilot on it. I immediately dove into my usual go-to sages, i.e. Google, for details, and everywhere I looked, every one of my knowledgeable minions I consulted came up short. The only info I could find is everything that you see in that little box up there. The developer, release date, product code, and the fact that it's a Japanese exclusive. As you can imagine, I was fascinated. so much so that I had to download a ROM in lieu of the game arriving in the mail. So what's this game about? Well, I'm not sure. I have the manual, but of course I can't really read it. The artwork from the box isn't very helpful, it turns out. You're not in a fighter plane, for one thing. The first thought I had was a throwback to the 1990 Electro Brain title Bionic Battler. This is a first-person shooting maze game. I don't think you're a person, though, whereby over 21 arenas you have to collect a certain number of parts, little tin cans with a P on them, or clear each of the enemies. Some levels won't have any parts to find, so you'll just have to destroy everything, and it's one or the other. Collect all the parts and you beat the stage. The enemies themselves are varied. Some are these mecha suit cyborgs that I imagine you yourself are. Understand my confusion in that you never actually see yourself, whereas some are floating droids or other forms of mechanical constructs. They don't really come after you as such, nothing so intelligent as that. Rather, some of them patrol around in a small route back and forth or round in circles, and some lie in wait to spring out once they see you. Fortunately, you're not blind. Pressing select in-game brings up a map of the closest area of the maze, and if you're in proximity, around 4 or 5 tile space to an enemy, a dot will appear on the map. You'll also hear a sound like a bouncy ball that gets louder the closer it gets, and also uses the stereophonic nature of the Game Boy to pinpoint a direction. There aren't many examples of that which spring to mind. It's pretty cool. Select is not just your map, you'll be pressing this a lot. On this screen is information about remaining enemies and parts, but also your fuel and damage. The levels aren't timed, but you have a limited fuel supply that drops as you move. There are a few restocks, but these dwindle as the game goes on. There are also health pickups, but these too are quite rare. The thing about this map screen is the game doesn't actually pause when you're looking at it. You yourself can't move, but the enemies are still patrolling their predetermined pathways and will still shoot you if they see you. Just be cautious and you shouldn't get sprung upon. In terms of controls, left and right rotate you through 90 degrees and up moves you forward 1 space. Annoyingly, down doesn't move you backwards. It makes you briefly look downwards, which, as far as I can tell, doesn't serve a purpose. You don't have to look at the ground to pick things up, you just step on them. Occasionally there are landmines or other traps, but these are pretty visible anyway, and it would be kind of useful not to have to spin a 180 to go back the way you came, especially when being attacked. A fires your weapon, but B does nothing. Some limited-use secondary weapon like a bomb or missile would have been nice. Sometimes it'll seem that there's an enemy out of reach. This happens notably on the second level, whereby, according to the map, the thing's walking around a closed-off area. You can hear it distantly and see it on your radar, but there appears to be no way to get to the blighter. You now need to find a keycard to unlock a path, and these are not marked on your map. It'd be kind of pointless if they were, as I guess it's supposed to be a kind of exploration element, but they're not usually too hard to find. There's barely any music in this title, and none in-game at all, but the sound effects do a really good job of setting an atmosphere. What I first thought were your character's footsteps actually seem to be a kind of heartbeat, rhythmic and intermittent. Once you make that connection, the game becomes that little bit more tense. The use of volume and stereo sound for the approach of the enemies is executed brilliantly as well. A very subtle and skillful use of a small handful of sounds. That was surely the name of the game here, as evidenced by the look of the whole thing. No scenery save the slab walls of the mazes, but a very smooth 3D effect with an impressive draw distance that allows you to see a good 3 or 4 spans ahead of you. I really like Ray Thunder. I've no idea what the story is, but it almost doesn't matter. I've sort of made my own premise up, and in a way I like the game better for that. It doesn't need to be understood. The language of the manual and lack of any English information on the web transcended by what is a delicately crafted little beauty. One of the happiest accidents I've ever come across in my collecting journey.
Two burgers to go, please.
Help me!
Introducing Burger Time, the new home video game where you're the chef.
trying to make hamburgers. There's just one problem. The food is trying to make hamburger out of you. Another hot new arcade game for Intellivision, Burger Time. With arcade-like super graphics, only on Intellivision.
We're closed now!
Burger Time Deluxe DMG-GM, developed and published by Data East. Based on the 1982 arcade game Burger Time, you play as gourmet burger chef Peter Pepper. Each single screen level is spread over several platforms, with numerous ladders connecting them. The aim is to walk across sections of these massive hamburgers, making them drop down a level, until the bread, the meat, and any toppings are assembled on the plates below. There are a good number of burgers to make, with 3 to 6 layers each. Walking across the top bun causes it to fall to the next level, which creates a chain reaction, knocking all those below downwards. So it's quite beneficial to work from the top down if you can. That's not always possible, of course, as traipsing around the levels are various reanimated food products who seem to want revenge on our cuisinier. They follow you around slowly and kill upon contact. You thought sausage links only killed over time with a heart attack? These move roughly the same speed as you, and cannot turn around save after coming off a ladder. Even so, they can gang up on you, trapping you in corners and so on. It's possible to crush them underneath falling burger segments, but they'll just reappear out of one of several doors scattered about the level. It's also possible to walk across 3/4 of a burger part. The trampled bits sort of squash down a little. Wait for an enemy to step onto it, and then finish walking across. The enemy will then plummet along with the food. You get a number of lives, with collectible ones appearing. The collectibles are the only way to get extra lives, as none are given for points. Also, randomly these pepper pots will pop up. A little chirrup sound will alert you to it, which give you a decent number of points, and can be fired at enemies that are getting too close to make them sneeze and leave you alone for a while. You can collect what looks like a chocolate bar, turning you power pellet style into a food-killing machine. P pickups remove all enemies for a short while. The graphics are simple but effective, and the same can be said about the sound. Nothing mind-blowing, but it does what's needed. Later stages, of which there are 24 in total, are often larger than one screen, scrolling around with more enemies to avoid. But largely it's the same fare from start to finish. At the end of each set of stages, you're presented with a 4-character password, so you don't have to finish the whole game in one sitting. Burger Time Deluxe is standard fare, not haute cuisine, but certainly appetizing. With more levels than the arcade, some humorous little cutscenes, and a small story, this is quite fun if you like that sort of thing. Fortified Zone DMG-IY, developed and published by Jalico. Riding the meathead wave of gun-toting action heroes comes a title that screams late 80s, early 90s iron and explosions. Fortified Zone was called Ikari no Yusai in Japan. It's not related to Ikari Warriors, thankfully, which roughly translates as Fortress of Fury. You play as 2 mercenaries, a man and woman combo, tasked with destroying the central complex of a literal fortified zone. The characters are interchangeable, which is necessary as the man can't jump and the woman can't fire the special weapons. On each stage you have a non-linear maze to follow, which are sometimes multi-floored and has the feel of a Zelda dungeon. Some rooms only open their doors when all the enemies are killed, and there are traps and puzzles to navigate. It pays to explore the whole level rather than just seek the boss, as there are many special weapons and crates that hold health power-ups. Each one of these you collect gives your character, only the one who collects it, mind, another slot on their health bar. This is important because, although you start with 3 HP, a lot of enemies' attacks do more than just 1 point of damage. You'll often need to jump across spikes to get some of these bonuses, then switch back to the dude, who must have been piggybacking on the woman while she leapt across the danger. That's chivalry for you. If you want some health ups for him. To be honest, I'd put most of my health bonuses onto the man, as you're going to be using him for most of your fighting. Basically, the game tries to legitimize the addition of the female character by making her gather the tools that the man needs to do his man thing. According to the manual, I've never tried this, it's possible in the two-player game for the two characters to split up and take on different parts of the maze at the same time. That's pretty clever if it's the case, creating a unique co-op mode for the system at this time. The audiophile in me really appreciates the Sound Boy menu option, which allows you to listen to all of the music in the game. It's the first example of a music menu I can recall so far on the Game Boy, which is great in itself, but the fact that the music absolutely rocks makes this an awesome feature that I really dig. Jaleco were clearly proud of the soundtrack, and rightly so. We've got foreboding military-style songs coupled with fast-paced rock tracks that have some particularly excellent stereo-channel drum synth work going on. The harmonies within all this are broad and very clever, and not at all cliched. One of my favourite soundtracks so far. The game doesn't look quite as outstanding, though, although the cutscenes are very well drawn. Everything is visible and nicely sized, but the backgrounds could have been changed up more. The field looks like the jungle, and so on, but it's functional. The enemies are largely all the same, but at least the bosses look pretty badass. The hitbox of your character is slightly too large, I would say. Also, I wish you could move and shoot diagonally. The controls are the only real letdown in the game. When jumping over spikes, for instance, you need to take off slightly earlier than you'd imagine, or else you're getting impaled. You can get used to all these things, but there's a slight lack of polish. Thankfully, this was improved in the Japan-exclusive sequel, Ikari no Yusai 2, which was much the same, but only had one character who could do everything. Done away with was the awkward jumping mechanic, instead giving the player several selectable weapons from the outset, as well as being able to maneuver in all 8 directions. You don't really need to read Japanese to play it, so is one of those imports I thoroughly recommend. I can only assume Fortified Zone didn't go down so well because we should have definitely got the follow-up over here. The third game in this series became the considerably more well-known Operation Logic Bomb on the Super Nintendo, and that's just as good. Thanks for listening to the Portable Power Podcast. If you want to support the show, the best way to do so is on Patreon at patreon.com/Portable Power Podcast. Or subscribe on the YouTubes. We have daily uploads Monday to Friday, where you can watch me suck at the games as I talk about them. You can tweet me at POCubed or on any of the other socials you might expect. Thanks again and have a great weekend.